This is Tom Martin, a National Hockey League player who has had quite the career, but pretty much every single one of his achievements has been overshadowed by the fact that there was one time he was sold by his team and traded for a bus. Yes, a bus of all things. Hello! Welcome to Brainspill, the laziest show on the internet. My name is Tank, and yes, this is a particularly odd story and it really piqued my interest because most of the time when you have a professional sports team, they either trade players for other players or they may simply loan or sell those players for hard cash. However, in this case, clearly the team that was selling the player realised that their need for a bus far outweighed the need for this particular player, which must have been a pretty sad state of affairs, but we'll get into it and find out how this happened and why on earth they were in such dire straits where they needed to sell their own player to get a bus. Tom Martin is a former ice hockey player from Canada, in which he built his career as a 4th round pickup for the Winnipeg Jets and played 92 NHL games for the Jets. He even won the Calder Cup in 1985 and was a first-team All-Star for the American Hockey League in 1988. And there's no doubt that this guy was a good player. He regularly bounced throughout his career between the American Hockey League and the National Hockey League, going back and forth for some time. However, despite all of these achievements, it's easily overshadowed by the whole bus fiasco, which we'll get into. Following 2 seasons of junior hockey, Martin was added to the Seattle Breakers reserve list. The reason for this was that he wanted to get himself an education whilst at university in Denver during 1982 to 1983. This meant that while he was on the reserve list, he would likely never play a game with the team. So the team had this player on their reserve list, but they realised that he would probably never be used, mainly due to the fact that he prioritised his education over playing hockey with them. So they got their thinking caps on and thought, how could we make this a positive? What can we do to try and capitalise on this and at least make something from this player? I mean, he's just sat there not doing anything, so what could they do? So, as any team would, they would manage their players and finances and made some decisions over a potential trade of Tom Martin. Weighing up what they needed, it was less so that they needed another hockey player, but it was more so the fact that the Seattle Breakers needed a team bus. This was due to the fact that their TVS team bus engine blew up whilst they were on the road. A golden opportunity arose when it became clear that Tom Martin was still keen on playing for his hometown team, the Victoria Cougars, during his education if required. And for Tom Martin, he unfortunately couldn't play for the Cougars because he was already reserved for the Seattle Breakers. So instead they came to an agreement to trade him to the Cougars in exchange for an extra bus that they had, which is pretty strange that they had an extra bus on hand, but there we are. As if by pure coincidence, the Cougars management bought their bus in a previous season, but the Cougars couldn't use this bus because of the fact that the management didn't want to pay the taxes and duties to register the vehicle in Canada. So the trade was agreed and Tom Martin was traded for a bloody bus. You can't make this shit up. Also, if you're enjoying the video, drop a like. I mean, thankfully the circumstances made it where they needed a bus and Tom Martin wanted to go play for his hometown team, so it just sort of made sense. But just imagine being the guy and having that on your record that you were sold for a bus. Reporting at the time not only picked up on the story, but also hinged onto the fact that the bus was actually a used bus. So to add insult to injury, it was often bantered about that an NHL player was traded for a used bus. By used, it had only racked up a few miles, but it was what it was. The bus itself was quite large and had many bunks in it, meaning that it was perfect for the team so they could ferry about all the players wherever they needed to go. Martin left the University of Denver and played for the Victoria Cougars in 1983 to 84. After the trade, Tom Martin wanted to see the bus that he'd been traded for. Having seen pictures of the bus painted with the new Seattle Breakers imagery on the side, he was told that they'd actually lost the bus prior to the Cougars and Breakers game in Victoria. So how the hell did they lose the bus? Well, apparently the reason is that one of the players that the Seattle Breakers had didn't have a visa, so when they crossed the border, they confiscated the bus for 6 months, meaning that Tom Martin never got to see the bus that he was traded for. This just adds insult to injury, not gonna lie. Martin turned pro with the American Hockey League's Sherbrooke Jets at the end of the 83 to 84 season and started his pro career. The bus story was probably all just something to look back on and laugh at, but when he turned pro, the story followed him because everybody knew who he was and what had happened. So he was aptly named Tom Bussy Martin from there on going forward. You know, due to the fact that he was traded for a bus. So Bussy is a very fitting middle name to have. He would carry on this nickname for pretty much the rest of his career, and like I said, this is the thing that most people remember him for, because you were traded for a bus. I feel like I'm rubbing that in a bit, but I'm just going to have to keep repeating it to myself to make myself believe that it actually happened. This is a pretty crazy story, but it's not actually the first time that something like this has happened. With Major League pitcher Keith Comstock, who is known for being traded for a box of used baseballs as a minor leaguer, and independent league baseball player John Odom, who in May 2008 was traded by Calgary Vipers of the Golden Baseball League to Laredo Broncos of the United League for 10 bats. I mean, come to think of it, at least a bus has quite a bit of value, it will be useful to get you to places and all that stuff. But imagine being traded for a box of balls or 10 bats. You know what, I think Tom Bussy Martin might actually have got off quite light in comparison to those last two examples, so I'll give you that one. Throw you a bone. So yes, Tom Bussy Martin, the player who is the only person in Western hockey history to ever be traded for a bus. If you guys like that video, here's another one just like it. I'll see you guys in the next video. Fantastic.